Now, a lot of irregularities in a caucus, that's always what happens. God, it's a complicated process. I'm going to explain it a little bit to you guys now. Some of Sanders' camp was, of course, upset about the coin tosses. Hillary Clinton, 6 precincts were close enough that they had the coin toss. She won all 6. But then there were concerns about other irregularities, votes that weren't counted. So let me tell you more about that. The Hill explains, Democrats do not rely on paper ballots for caucuses. Supporters instead physically cluster together and are counted by precinct chairs. That means there are no provisions for a recount on the Democratic side, since those events are not possible to recreate. So if you were hoping for a recount for the Democrats, that's not how it works. They'd have to put the people back in the building and go, wait, were you here before? So they can't recount. It's people literally clustering together and somebody physically counting them. A Sanders aide told The Hill that the party did not send impartial staffers to 90 caucus sites and is now reaching out to the candidates for help reporting the data. That would mean that precinct captains from the rival campaigns will have to self-report totals from the caucus, which could lead to arguments over a swath of precincts that could more than make up the margin between the two candidates. Now, that is true, and that is one of the problems inherent in a caucus, which is that if you don't have neutral arbiters at every one of these precincts, and there's a ton of precincts, and here the Sanders camp says there was 90 precincts where there was not a neutral arbiter, well, one side or the other, and it could be the Sanders side or the Hillary Clinton side, is in charge of reporting those results. And as you're going to see in a minute, the Sanders side screwed up in one of the precincts, and that wound up hurting Bernie Sanders a little bit until they sorted it out. But obviously that's not a good system and could lead to more controversy. So one of the pieces of controversy is reported by the Des Moines Register. In one particular precinct, a total of 484 eligible caucus attendees were initially recorded at the site, but when each candidate's preference group was counted, Clinton had 240 supporters, Sanders had 179, and Martin O'Malley had 5, causing him to be declared non-viable. So then they have to recount and see which way the O'Malley supporters go, because if you're not viable, your supporters have to go somewhere else. Now, those figures added up to just 424 participants when they recounted, leaving 60 apparently missing. When those numbers were plugged into the formula that determines delegate allocations, Clinton received 4 delegates and Sanders received 3, leaving 1 delegate unassigned. Now, the controversy there is that the delegate unassigned should have gone to Bernie Sanders, and they don't know what happened with the 60 extra votes that were missing. Now, my best guess to this is that it is human error. It's a bunch of people in Iowa that counted wrong. Now, could it be that one side had an incentive to count wrong because they weren't coming out ahead? And since there's no neutral arbiter on the site, they go, oh, this is our vote total, and see if they can sneak it by the other side. And maybe they did sneak it by the other side, and that's how this came out. Is that a grand conspiracy that Hillary Clinton hatched and said, oh, if there's 484 votes, make sure that instead it'll be 424? No. Is this problematic on the edges? Yes. They should come up with a better system than this. This is obviously not the correct system, because if it's this close, and this is the closest election they've ever had on the Democratic side in Iowa, you're going to run into 100 of these problems. And actually, I'm surprised there aren't more of these issues from the caucus night. Now, I want to tell you about one more, and this is in Des Moines, number 42, in that particular precinct. It gives you a sense of the chaos of last night. The impromptu chairman, who was selected, by the way, he didn't want to be selected. He was a reluctant voter, but they couldn't find someone neutral to do it. So they picked this guy who had attended when he was barely interested. I don't know about barely interested, but barely attended. He said the impromptu chairman of Des Moines, number 42, told the Register when he realized that his precinct had the key to the final missing votes, he took Tuesday off work and was driving home to get the paperwork, but he didn't know who was logging the tallies. So the guy who'd never done this before, both sides had their guys, and they didn't want one person to run it and lose a vote, or whatever their motivation was on that day. Picked this guy who was like, I kind of stumbled in here. Oh, geez, I've never done this. All right, I guess I'll count, right? And then he didn't realize he had to report the count. So he went home. The next day, they're like, your precinct 42 is missing. Where the hell is it? It's like, oh, get that. The paperwork's at home. He goes home to go get the paperwork. So the party's caucus hotline was no longer working, so that was a problem. The party headquarters was locked, so they couldn't vote this guy's vote, so they didn't know what had happened in precinct number 42. Finally, they got the votes in, and the state's party website has now been updated to reflect that Sanders won 58.3% and Clinton won 41.7% in precinct number 42. So that wound up helping Bernie Sanders. So Hillary Clinton seemed to have a slightly wider lead last night than she did in reality this morning when all the votes were counted. But nonetheless, she won either way, again, by 0.3%. Now, Des Moines Register also says Pete D'Alessandro, Sanders' Iowa campaign coordinator, said he doesn't question the integrity of the state party, but he said the last-minute scramble probably meant many caucus chairs weren't properly trained on how to report their voting results. Now, I agree with that. I really think that there's no global conspiracy here, and I'm not shy to point one out if I think the facts merit it. I just think it's standard incompetence in a very convoluted system. And at the end of the day, the Democratic Iowa caucus delegate equivalent count was, after the new Sanders votes taken into account, 699.57 to Clinton to 697.77 to Sanders. So you will see some different numbers because some organizations have different numbers for whatever reason in the press today. But either way, it's off by 1 or 2 points, and every single account agrees that even after those Sanders votes in number 42 are counted in, Hillary Clinton won by about this much, but in essence, it's actually a tie, the closest election ever. So there's no need to sweat it anymore, and if you're in the Sanders camp, you actually should be pretty damn happy with a tie because you were down by over 60 points when this whole thing started a year ago, and to have come back and unseated the favorite in this way is near miraculous. So it is as good a result as you could almost hope for. Of course, it would have been better to win outright. But at the end of the day, this will not be a large issue, especially a week from now when Bernie Sanders is expected to win in New Hampshire by about 20 points, where you won't have any of these issues because the election won't be anywhere near close.